on the first song that I did, one second, I need to do a sound check. Okay, that was it. Spoke a little bit about the way that environment can influence songwriting and vice versa. You know, I think that there's something magical and something that permeates, you know, music history in general about a place and a song and a feeling. And I think that it's because you feel a certain way when you're in a place, and music, in a lot of ways, is sort of a, you know, it's a way of expressing feeling. And when I was recording Smoke and Mirrors, my last album, I wanted to feel that inspiration. I didn't want to be in a, you know, this kind of sterile recording studio trying to pretend that I was somewhere else. So we tried to seek out these places that had the most historical impact. You know, you could just feel the ghosts and the spirits and the history in these places. And since there was a lot of blues in that album, I thought, what's the best blues location I could possibly find? And I thought, well, how about the Crossroads, where Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil in order to become, you know, the greatest guitar player ever? And sounds like a good place. So that sort of brought about the question, well, how the heck do you find the Crossroads? So we did a little research and asked around and had a few connections out in Memphis, and we found these old handwritten this handwritten direction that was written about 20 years ago by a voodoo practitioner out on Beale Street. It was sort of like a treasure map, step by step. You know, it didn't give you like the GPS coordinates. But it said you go down this highway, and you see this, you take a left, you see this, take a right, you find that you're on this old plantation, and you cross these railroad tracks right next to this curve in the tracks. And then you see this church, this old dilapidated church that used to be the church for the plantation workers. And there's this old dirt crossroads right next to that church, and that's the Crossroads. So we followed these directions, and it just so happened that when everyone on the team that was coming down to record this, folks from Sun Studio and Richard Brantley, who I mentioned earlier, and about 10 other people from around the world came down. Went down there on New Year's Eve last year at midnight in 27-degree weather on the darkest night of the month. Decided, well, if we're going to record a blues album, this is probably the best place to do it. So we did. And then when we were mastering those songs at Sun Studio a few weeks later, we thought, let's go see if we can find any relatives of that old voodoo practitioner who we got those directions from. We found the grandson of the person who wrote those directions, and he told us a really interesting story about basically why that was the Crossroads, or at least his take on it. Since I love history and I love music, I decided I'd kind of put this story to a soundtrack. And you see, back in the day, if you were wanting to go play at those juke joints in Mississippi, in the Delta, let's say you lived down the Mississippi River, you weren't going to just hitchhike up there, you didn't have a nice Cadillac to get into because you were a musician. So you'd go down to the river and you'd hop on a riverboat on the Mississippi. You'd sneak on there if you didn't have any money. And then when you got to right around Clarksdale, you'd hop off, and there was a train that carried cargo from the river to this plantation right there that was right in the heart of all of that Mississippi Delta juke joint country. So you pretend to be hauling baggage onto one of those carts, one of those trains, and then you just jump on yourself. Then you'd hear that train chug, picking up a little steam. Find a good hiding spot. See those wheels start moving. Start feeling a little more up speed. Maybe get a little more comfortable, pull out your guitar and start strumming along to that train. Hear that whistle as it rolls out the station. Picking up speed. Then you start worrying a little bit. You think, I've got to get off of this train somehow, and if I get off at the station, there's going to be people waiting there for me. Luckily, I heard from a buddy of mine who did this before me that there's this turn in the railroad track right next to these crossroads out there on this plantation. So not only does that train have to slow down to make that curve, but I got a nice spot to catch a ride. So you hear that engine slow down just a bit? Slow, you pack up your guitar, hold on to your hat, grab that bag, whatever you got with you, and you get ready to jump off of that train right as it's going around that bend. You pick up your hat and pick up your guitar case, dust yourself off just a little bit. Look around your shoulder. You see those little crossroads in the distance? Put your thumb up. Wait for someone to take you into town. Then off in the distance, you just hear that train get quieter and quieter. Pull into that station. So some people might think that Robert Johnson went down to those crossroads and sold his soul to the devil, and maybe it just happened that any dedicated enough person who was willing to go down there playing those juke joints and make a name for himself was hitching rides at that crossroads, because that's about the cheapest form of transportation in the Delta.